Jeffrey Epstein's story begins long before the leaks and court filings that later shook politics, business circles and celebrity culture. He built his life on secrecy and influence, and the documents that eventually spilled out only confirmed what many people suspected for years. To understand how those leaked files became so explosive, you have to start with the world he created around himself. It was a world where money opened nearly every door, and the people stepping through those doors rarely asked questions about what actually went on. Epstein grew up in New York and had the kind of early life that didn't point toward the enormous power he would later gather. His rise came through a mix of charm, intelligence and connections. He worked briefly as a teacher, then moved into finance with no degree and barely any real credentials. Still, he found a way to make himself look indispensable. He convinced people that he had rare insight into money management, and he used that reputation to enter rooms where he didn't truly belong. From there he built a network. That network became the foundation of everything that followed. Through the late 80s and 90s he began surrounding himself with high-profile figures. Politicians, academics, business magnates, lawyers, media people and royalty crossed paths with him. Some were close friends, some were occasional visitors, and some later claimed they barely knew him. Epstein played every relationship to his advantage. He offered access, money, flights on his private jet and invitations to his various homes, including the mansion in Manhattan and the private island in the Virgin Islands. His greatest strength was making people feel like being around him was an opportunity they couldn't pass up. His greatest weapon was the privacy he controlled in those spaces. For a long time, rumors circulated quietly. Girls coming and going. Staff members who quit without explanation. Settlements that seemed to appear out of nowhere. As more documents surfaced, the scale of Epstein's network became clearer. The leaked material showed how he used his wealth to pull people into his orbit and keep them there. His homes were often described as places where business meetings, social events, and private visits blended into one another. Staff members gave sworn statements describing constant activity. Guests came and went, some staying only a few hours, others for days. Many of them later said they saw nothing unusual, while former employees claimed they witnessed situations that made them uncomfortable but felt unable to speak out. Inside these leaked files were detailed accounts from young women who described how they were brought into Epstein's world. Their stories followed a similar pattern. Someone they trusted introduced them to him. That person often received money or favors for making the introduction. What happened next varied from case to case, but the common thread was manipulation. Epstein used authority, money and charm to make these girls feel trapped or obligated. The files revealed messages, payment records and schedules that showed how organized the operation was. It wasn't random or impulsive. It was structured and controlled. The material also contained travel records. The flight logs from Epstein's private jet, often referred to as the Lolita Express, became one of the most frequently examined sets of documents. These logs listed passengers, dates and destinations. People studied every name, trying to determine who was simply a guest and who might have been involved in something deeper. Some passengers said they traveled for business or charity-related reasons. Others gave no comment. The logs alone didn't prove wrongdoing, but they painted a picture of how widely Epstein traveled and how many different layers of society he touched. One of the most sensitive parts of the leaks involved depositions from individuals who had worked closely with Epstein. These witnesses described S. When Epstein died in 2019, the leaks didn't slow down. They accelerated. His death created a vacuum that raised more questions than answers. People wondered how a man under such high-profile supervision could take his own life. Others doubted the official explanation and demanded independent investigations. While these debates grew louder, lawyers for the victims pushed even harder to unseal the remaining documents. Without Epstein alive to testify, they argued that secrecy no longer served any purpose. Judges faced a difficult balance. Some of the sealed files contained private information about individuals who were never charged with anything. Other sections included sensitive details from victims who wanted anonymity. Still, the pressure was enormous. The public believed that full disclosure was the only way to understand the scope of the case. Whenever a judge released another batch of documents, even if small, it became front-page news. The next wave of leaks included interview summaries, travel receipts and internal emails from Epstein's staff. They revealed how deeply embedded he was in political and social circles. He wasn't just a wealthy figure who happened to know a few powerful people. He was someone who built a network that spanned continents. Some high-profile individuals had visited his island or flown on his jet more than once. Some stayed at his Manhattan townhouse, a place described in court documents as meticulously controlled, with multiple rooms where visitors were not permitted without permission. There were also references to people whose names had been whispered for years but never confirmed in official records. The leaked files didn't prove wrongdoing by these individuals, but they placed them in locations and situations that raised uncomfortable questions. As each name surfaced, public reactions split between those calling for deeper investigation and those accusing the media of sensationalism. But the fact remained that these files were. As the final rounds of leaked documents appeared, the scale and complexity of Epstein's world became impossible to deny. The files from the later releases were fuller, more organized and more detailed than anything that came before. They tied together years of fragmented information and created a timeline that showed how persistent and calculated his behavior was. They also showed how many people had crossed paths with him, whether intentionally or by accident, and how those connections continued to haunt them after his death. The last sets of leaks included transcripts from long-buried depositions. These interviews captured moments where witnesses hesitated, changed their stories or tried to avoid certain questions. Lawyers asked direct questions about who visited Epstein's properties, what they saw and what they suspected. Some witnesses claimed they didn't remember. Others said they never sensed anything illegal happening around them. But hidden between the lines were lists, descriptions and hints that helped investigators reconstruct a clearer picture of what life inside Epstein's circle looked like. One part of the final files contained descriptions of Epstein's island and how it operated. Former staff described strict routines. Boats arrived at predictable times. Security kept careful track of who was on the property. Some visitors were escorted around. Others had full freedom to move through the estate. The leaked notes mentioned rooms that were kept locked, areas people weren't allowed to enter and private buildings that only Epstein and a select few used. These details showed just how much control he exerted over every part of the island, from schedules to movements to who interacted with whom. The leaks also included messages between Epstein and his associates. Some of these messages were mundane, but others showed clear coordination around travel arrangements and instructions about handling certain guests. The tone in these messages suggested a hierarchy.